If you are still struggling with stiff muscles that are interfering with your movement after a neurologic injury, it could be because a tight muscle and a spastic muscle are not the same thing. In today's video, we are going to go over some of the most common stretching mistakes that I see for stretching a spastic muscle. And in full transparency, some of the mistakes you could be making are things you might have learned on this channel. So in this video, I'm going to clear the air, set the record straight on some things I may have said in the past, where I've kind of updated my protocol for stretching a spastic muscle. You're going to learn a little bit about what causes a spastic muscle to become spastic and feel so tight. And of course, you're going to leave this video with practical steps that you can start taking today to relax a spastic muscle. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist with over 22 years of experience helping people restore their mobility and their independence after a neurologic injury. And if you are someone who feels stuck in your neuro recovery and you want guided exercises that actually work, and you want to be able to interact with me throughout the week to help you with your neurologic recovery, you would absolutely be a perfect fit for our Gold membership program. To learn more about our Gold membership program, to sign up, or to schedule a discovery call to see if our program is right for you, you can visit rehab-hq.com. And now let's tackle one of the biggest barriers to restoring normal arm movement, and is that it is all of that resistance you feel from muscles that are spastic. So quick review, what is a spastic muscle, or what is spasticity after a neurologic injury? Spasticity is an involuntary contraction because of a loss of connection with parts of the brain that actually help to inhibit overactive movements. And most mistakes that people make with stretching is that what you think is going on is that you think you have a tight muscle, when in reality you have a muscle that is involuntarily contracting and it has resistance to lengthening. So let's take your bicep, for example. There's resistance to making that bicep longer. That is spasticity. Now you combine that with an involuntary contraction of that muscle, because some of the connection with the brain that inhibits overactivity in a muscle is in some way impaired due to your neurologic injury. And it's this involuntary contraction component that really separates spasticity from a tight muscle. And because of this, many of you are doing exercises that are very appropriate for a tight muscle, but not necessarily the best exercises or stretches for an overactive muscle, a muscle that is involuntarily contracting. And this brings us to mistake number one, which is prolonged holds. And some of you have actually heard this on this channel. I oftentimes recommend a prolonged hold, and I recommend holding it for 1 minute. And that's really based on evidence for a tight muscle and maybe not necessarily evidence for a spastic muscle. Now, as we go through all of these mistakes, it's really important to remember that a spastic muscle that has been involuntarily contracting for a long time can turn into muscle tightness or even a muscle contracture. So there is some overlap here, but I don't think enough of you are spending the required amount of time addressing the spastic side of the muscle and maybe too heavily weighed towards the tight side of the muscle, if that makes sense. So prolonged holds are great for a tight muscle. And yes, 1 minute seems to be the sweet spot for getting some more elasticity in that muscle. But actually what works better for stretching or improving the lengthening capability of a spastic muscle is a slight, slow movement. Now, why is that? Muscles become more spastic, or that spasticity is triggered by lengthening. In particular, rapid lengthening of a muscle. And some of you have experienced this. You'll be walking and your arm will be bouncing and you're getting these little bit of lengthenings of that bicep muscle and you feel like your arm becomes more spastic. Well, that's because of spasticity. So what I recommend, instead of a prolonged hold, occasionally changing up your stretching routine to do a rhythmic motion, a rhythmic lengthening. What you're doing is you're getting the muscle to be more tolerant of that lengthening motion without being triggered. So prolonged holds are okay, but it should be combined with something where you're doing a rhythmic, slow lengthening. And that brings us to mistake number 2, which is stretching a spastic muscle too quickly. So spasticity, that involuntary contraction, is what we call velocity dependent, meaning the faster you lengthen the muscle, the stronger that involuntary contraction is going to be. So many of you are in this battle, this war with your muscles when you're stretching, just because you're stretching too fast. So if you're going to stretch your bicep, do it very, very slow. But that brings us to number 3, which is prolonged holds or even like stretching sessions every day are not enough. And why is that? Because when you finish that session, even if you do 30 minutes a day of stretching, if you have a muscle with that involuntary contraction, it's going to be contracting through the day. So when it involuntarily contracts, that muscle is shortened, and the longer it stays shortened, the more resistance you're going to have to lengthening. So if we're talking about the wrist, you have to have some kind of a splint, something that can hold that wrist in extension. So if you have an involuntary motion like this, your wrist is flexing down, you really do need a splint that keeps that wrist open. Stretching even 30 minutes a day in a 24-hour period is not enough. And the problem with most of the splints that you find on Amazon is they're just not strong enough. They weren't designed for like an involuntary contraction. They're either what we call a resting hand splint, which kind of allows your wrist to be flexed a little bit, or they're made for some kind of an orthopedic injury and they just weren't designed to be strong enough to resist a involuntary contraction from a spastic muscle. So with that said, I have designed a splint. There's a link to a form in the description to this video. If it's something you want to learn more about, fill out that form. But if you have some kind of a splint, wear it. That is the moral of that story. Stretching even 30, 45 minutes a day is not enough. The next mistake I see most people make is not being in the right position. Now, another thing that triggers a spasm is stimulation, any kind of a stimulant, or anything where the body feels like it's working. Many times that makes spasticity worse. So I know a lot of you have a hard time laying down throughout the day to do your stretches. So a lot of you do your stretches in your chair. And while doing them up in your chair for the arm is better than not doing them at all, laying down for doing your arm stretches is probably a more ideal position, or having your arms supported on a table while you stretch your wrist. You're just going to decrease the opportunities for those spastic muscles to actually contract. So I always recommend having your arms supported in some way. Now, along the lines of positioning, the next tip is the environment you're in. Many of you already know this. The more stimulation there is around you, loud noises, bright lights, conversations, physical stress, having an argument with someone, you notice that your spasticity is worse. So if you are going to have a dedicated time every day to work on your stretches, I highly, highly recommend that you are in a low stim environment. Maybe even a dark room with blackout shades, no sound, no conversations, especially if they're a little bit more hostile in nature or anything that's going to increase your stress. I also recommend doing your stretches at a time of day when you just know you're naturally more relaxed. Your environment matters. And then the next mistake I see many, many people make, because you're doing a stretch, you have it in this stretching bucket and it's very passive. If you really wanted to upgrade your stretching routine, I highly recommend you alternating it with something where you're doing an active movement. Best case scenario is that you have someone at home that can help you with your stretches, and they can help what we call do an active assist. So you stretch it a little bit, maybe then you do some rhythmic motion like we talked about earlier, and then you go right into a movement where you're contracting the antagonist, the muscle on the opposite side of the joint. Now, I know what many of you are going to say, that I just can't, my arm doesn't move in that direction. We've just recently did a video on vibration and how beneficial vibration can be. This might be one of those opportunities where you immediately follow it up with some kind of like a massage gun to the tricep, if it's your bicep that you're trying to relax, immediately following your stretches. Now, this next mistake, which really isn't a mistake, but this next somewhat of a mistake only applies to the leg. But another very, very common mistake that I see is people do not do their calf stretching standing. They do their calf stretching, so your muscles that point your foot down can become spastic. We've talked about that quite a bit on this channel. And so many of you are stretching that sitting, probably because it's safer. If there's any way possible that you can stretch your calf muscle standing up, it's a lot better. We do know that there sometimes weight bearing, getting your body weight through a limb, can minimize that spasticity. So if at all possible, if you can if you're trying to stretch your calf muscle, try and do it in a weight bearing position, i.e. standing. If you're trying to stretch your wrist, it might even be beneficial to have weight bearing through your elbow, maybe on a table as you're stretching your wrist. It might just get the brain more online or engaged with that arm, and you could potentially see your spasticity reduce slightly, which will make the stretch a little bit easier. And then the last mistake I see many, many people make is that if someone else is stretching you, you're kind of checked out. Or even maybe when you're doing your stretches, you just think, I don't really need to like engage with this because it's passive and I'm just stretching my arm. And you aren't engaging the brain with that range of, I will call these range of motion exercises, meaning you're trying to get the joint to move through a larger range of motion. These are more range of motion exercises, but you aren't engaging the brain enough. And in this case, it would be inhibition. So as you're lengthening it, you really want to be like thinking, relax, relax. So, so, so important. But that is it for this video. Those are the most common mistakes I've made and how I've changed my position a little bit on the recommendations that I have for the most effective protocol for a spastic muscle after a neurologic injury. I hope you guys found these tips or suggestions helpful. Don't forget, we do have our membership program. If you want to engage with me a little bit more and you want to participate in our monthly Q&As where you can get your specific questions answered, as well as access to an entire exercise vault of home exercises that are the same exercises that I give to my patients that I see in person. Our gold membership is perfect for you. Visit www.rehab-hq.com to learn about our membership programs or to schedule a discovery call to talk to someone in person to see if our program is right for you. I enjoyed spending time with you all today, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.